I hadn't made the drive to Bourne in over a year. It's funny how the road doesn't change, even when everything else does. I could still name every turn from memory, still feel the tension settle in my stomach the moment I passed that crooked fence post at the edge of the Merritt property. They'd fixed the porch since I last came. New stain, trimmed hedges, warm lights glowing through the windows like a damn Norman Rockwell painting. But I knew better. That house might look like comfort, but it only ever taught me how to stay quiet. Mom had called 2 days ago, said she wanted to clear the air, said it was time to reconnect as a family. I've heard those words before. They're the kind folks use when they're laying a trap, but want you to smile as you step into it. I pulled up and parked behind Darnell's Range Rover, the car that screamed success and smelled like someone else's money. In my passenger seat sat the envelope, cream-colored, slightly frayed on the edge. Inside was the letter I'd written weeks ago. Nothing fancy, just a few truths I needed to speak out loud. I picked it up, thought about reading it to them, then set it back down. Inside, the dining room looked like a magazine cover. Table set for 6, centerpieces too tall to talk over. The kind of place where appearances sat in the front row and honesty got stuck in the kitchen. My name card was tucked at the far end of the table, corner seat, nearest the swinging door that led to the pantry. My father, Ellison, took his usual place beside Mom, and Darnell sat like a king at the head. Center stage. My seat had a napkin folded differently than the others and a wine glass with a faint chip along the rim. Typical. They were already mid-conversation when I walked in. Mom gushing about Darnell's latest business launch, Dad nodding like a backup singer. I waited for a pause to mention the new contract my team had secured, our biggest event yet. But before I could get halfway through the sentence, Mom waved her fork. "You always bring up work," she said. "Can't we just enjoy dinner without your projects?" I smiled, nodded, bit the inside of my cheek. Their version of bonding was smiling at each other and pretending I wasn't there. I knew the rhythm: laugh at Darnell's jokes, ignore Raylene when she tries to exist. The soup came out as the second course. Creamy, thick, poured into heavy white porcelain bowls. It smelled rich, like roasted garlic, thyme, maybe a hint of something earthy. But as I lifted my spoon, a bitterness wafted up. Not spoiled, just wrong. The kind of wrong that doesn't announce itself but waits, patient. Mom leaned in with that look she always used when she was pretending to be maternal. "Try it, Ray," she said. "You've barely touched anything." There was that smile again, that pleasant, sharp-edged smile. I picked up the spoon and brought it close to my lips. My seat, near the door, near the heat, always slightly out of view. I faked a small slip, tilted the spoon too far. A little soup splashed onto the edge of the napkin. I wiped it up slowly. Didn't say a word. The last time I'd eaten that soup, I was sick for 2 days. Not hospital sick, just dizzy, nauseous, unable to focus. I'd chalked it up to stress. Maybe it was. But now I wasn't so sure. Something in me snapped to attention. My heart didn't race. But my brain? My brain went to work. This wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. These people didn't look at me unless they needed to. And tonight, they were all watching. I put my spoon down gently, excused myself to the restroom, walked down the hallway, slow and steady, past the mirror near the hall closet, stopped, looked at myself, mouthed the words, "Don't eat it," and slipped the napkin, with those few drops of soup, into my coat pocket. I walked back to the table like nothing had happened, took my seat, adjusted my napkin, reached for the water glass like I hadn't just whispered to myself in the hallway that something was wrong. Everyone was right where I left them, still smiling, still chatting about nothing. The soup in front of me sat untouched. No one had noticed the small drops I'd spilled earlier. My hands were steady, but my gut coiled tighter the longer I sat there, not from fear of what I'd eaten, but from what I almost did. It hit me then, that memory I'd filed away as bad luck months ago. I'd been here. Same table, same soup. Back then, I blamed dairy. Figured it was the cream base that made me sick for 2 days. Couldn't focus. Head like cotton. Heart racing. Mom said it was stress. I believed her. because that's what I was raised to do. Now I saw it clearer. Same dish, same setting, same accidental first serving. That wasn't stress. That was strategy. And if you see the same pattern twice, it ain't coincidence. It's choreography. So I stopped trying to belong. I started watching. Dad leaned back in his chair, smiling, glass of wine in hand, but his eyes never landed on me, not once. Just kept talking, nodding along to Darnell, who was now explaining the next phase of his tech startup. No one interrupted him. Mom laughed too loudly, too often. She glanced at me a couple of times, at the bowl more than my face. And Darnell? He wasn't eating, just stirring his soup. Not tasting it, not once. Stirring, waiting. I looked at them like a forensic team might examine a body. Not for blood, but for behavior. Nothing felt natural. The way they angled their chairs, the pacing of the conversation, the way their voices dipped when I looked up, it was all too smooth. I brought my spoon up, not to eat, just to stir, just to see. And that's when I saw it. Darnell flinched, not a big one, just a flicker. A muscle twitch in his jaw. His eyes shifted, quick, like he'd seen something he didn't want to admit, and then they darted away, not because he was afraid of what I might say. He was afraid I might say it too soon. He knew. He didn't stop me, didn't speak. He just sat there, watching me nearly eat something he wouldn't touch. That cut deeper than whatever the hell was in the bowl. I didn't say anything, didn't throw the spoon or call anyone out. That would have been too easy, too expected. No, I just stared at Darnell. Then lifted the spoon again, this time dipping just the edge into the broth and letting it hover in the air. And then I gagged, softly, deliberately. I set the spoon down gently. "Too hot," I said. "I'll wait." The whole table froze for a beat too long. Then Mom clapped her hands together. "So Darnell, when do the investors fly in?" Dad reached for his glass again, nodding. Just like that, the show resumed. They didn't miss a beat. And that scared me more than anything, because I wasn't dealing with people who made mistakes. I was dealing with people who rehearsed. I looked down at my plate, then at my hands, then at their faces. I knew this wasn't a meal. It was a map. And every move I made from here on out mattered. This wasn't the first time. And if I stayed passive, it wouldn't be the last. I picked up my phone under the table and tapped the screen. Recording was already running. Just in case, I'd said to myself on the drive here. Turned out my instincts were sharper than I gave them credit for. Mom leaned in a few minutes later, soft-voiced and smooth. "You look pale, dear. Is something wrong with your soup?" I smiled at her, not wide, not warm. "No, Mom, I'm just remembering something." The room thinned out the way it always did. Some moved to the patio, others to the den. I stayed behind. Kept close to the dining room, but not too close to make them circle again. Every time I walked into a new space, their voices dropped. Conversations got soft around me. Not gone, just different. You can feel that kind of silence when it wraps around your shoulders. It wasn't paranoia, it was code, and I'd lived with it long enough to understand what wasn't being said. I left my napkin on the table like I'd be back soon, then drifted down the hallway, toward the study. The guest bathroom was the other way, but I took the long route, the one that passed the heart of the house, where the real decisions got made. The lights in this part of the hallway always burned dimmer. The air cooler, same as when I was 12, eavesdropping through a vent, learning that truth often travels quieter than lies. I paused when I heard the voices. The door to the small study was half shut, just enough for sound to escape, but not enough to welcome interruption. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Felda's voice came first. "Tonight, it ends. She was never meant to come back." Then my father, calm as always. "You better pray she doesn't remember the will." I leaned in, my palm pressed to the wall. I couldn't stop my fingers from shaking. A third voice joined, Jolien. Of course he was here. "If she digs, we need to neutralize it. She's legally outside now." Neutralize. That word didn't leave much room for guessing. I stepped back slowly, stomach turning. And then, of all things, I hit a loose board underfoot. It creaked, loud. Inside the room, silence fell like a gavel. I didn't wait. I turned on my heel and walked, steady, measured, like I'd never heard a damn word. Checked my phone as I passed the bookshelf, pretended to read a message. My head was screaming, but I made sure not one muscle in my face gave that away. When I rounded the corner back into the main room, Thelda saw me first. "Looking for the powder room, dear?" Her tone too high, her smile too wide. I gave her the smallest nod. Took the wrong hallway, forgot which door was which. She stared a second too long, but let it go. I sat again, back in my corner. They resumed as if nothing had happened. Darnell talking big about his app, Dad nodding, Mom laughing like nothing was unraveling beneath her feet. But it was. The wine glasses caught the chandelier light just so, and for a moment I could almost forget where I was, until I saw it. The ring, on her finger. The one with the gold band, and the tiny initials etched inside. My grandfather's ring. He promised it to me on my 25th birthday. Said it would be mine someday. I never saw it again after the funeral. They told me it was lost. Maybe slipped off at the hospital. Maybe one of the nurses had sticky fingers. She was wearing it now, not as a keepsake, not as something she wore in mourning. No, she wore it like it had always been hers. I didn't say anything, didn't ask, just watched the way her hand moved while she poured more wine. Careful, like she knew someone was paying attention. What else did they take while I was grieving? My mind drifted, back to that final morning before the funeral, his hands laid gently across his chest. I remember staring at them longer than I should have. Something was off, but I couldn't name it then. Now I could. He told me once, "This family has strong women. One day you'll need to remind them of that." And they'd buried that too. The will, the ring, the soup. Every piece fit now. It didn't matter if I cried, didn't matter if I begged. None of that worked. What mattered was what I remembered, and I remembered everything. I wiped my mouth with my napkin, slow and deliberate. Then leaned in, voice even, low enough just for her. "That's a beautiful ring, almost like it was made for someone else." Dinner ended like a scene that forgot how to close. The clinking of glasses faded, replaced by half-hearted laughter drifting toward the patio. Darnell was already bragging about some real estate tech play, and Thelda encouraged him like she was collecting points. I lingered at the table, not really moving, just breathing through my nose and counting the seconds before someone told me to leave the room politely. I stood to help with plates. Thelda waved me off, said, "No need, darling, we've got it." Her voice was sweet, measured, but the smile didn't reach her eyes, not even close. I wandered, letting the buzz of voices grow dim behind me, walked slow, not aimless. I knew where I was going, toward the den, where they kept the photo albums, the kind of relics most families forget to update, but Thelda, she curated them like an estate. I needed to see something that didn't change, or maybe I needed to see what they'd erased. The cabinet creaked when I opened it. I slid the biggest album from the bottom shelf, heavy, leather-bound, embossed in gold. Family 2000-2015. My fingers trembled more than I liked. First few pages were innocent enough. Backyard cookouts, church picnics. One blurry photo of Darnell as a chubby 10-year-old with cake on his shirt. I even smiled a little. Then the pages moved forward. Birthdays, anniversaries, graduations. I kept turning. And then, I wasn't there. Not in the background, not on the edge, not even as a caption. Photos I remembered being part of, just gone. One page in particular hit me hard. A family reunion at the lake. I knew I was there. I remembered the sweat on my neck, the way I'd spilled soda on my jeans. But the picture had been cropped tight. My body was clearly removed. The cut was clean, like I'd never existed. The caption said, "Family and friends." Not one name, not mine. I sat back slowly, breathing shallow. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was strategy. They didn't misplace me. They rewrote around me. I remembered asking for a copy of one of those photos once. Thelda had said, "Oh, honey, you weren't looking your best. We'll take another next time." There was no next time. I remembered how often I was the one behind the camera. "You're so good at it," they'd said. No, I was behind the lens because they wanted me out of the frame. Selective memory was a form of control. If they didn't capture me, they didn't have to account for me. If I didn't exist in the record, then my part of the story could be bent or cut entirely. My heart didn't break. It raced. With clarity, this was the family they wanted, one where I didn't disrupt the shot. I closed the album halfway, let my fingers rest on the cover. Then I stood up and walked down the hallway to the small reading room. Faye's spot, her favorite space, always near the window. She'd sit there with lemon tea and a crochet kit, smiling more with her eyes than her mouth. Tonight, the chair was empty. No one had mentioned her, not once. I pulled my phone from my pocket and sent a quick text. "You okay?" No reply. I headed back toward the dining area and caught Thelda near the archway. Casual, like nothing was amiss. "Where's Aunt Faye?" I asked lightly, like I wasn't holding on to something cold in my gut. Thelda's face didn't shift. "She wasn't feeling well. Thought it best to rest," Delroy added from behind her. "You know how she is, always making things bigger than they are." I nodded. Took a sip of water to keep from spitting fire. Faye didn't skip dinners. Not unless something or someone pushed her to. And now I saw the pattern. The ring, the soup, the album, the empty chair. This wasn't random. This wasn't family. This was subtraction. I walked to the edge of the hallway, just far enough that I could see them, but they couldn't see me. Texted Tiana. "Start looking into the estate paperwork. Now." I stared at the carpet beneath my feet. The weave pattern looked different from when I was a kid. Maybe it was the lighting. Or maybe I'd just stopped seeing it before. They wanted me out. Faye, too. But I wasn't leaving. Not this time. I went back to the den to return the album. As I slid it back onto the shelf, the back cover caught on the wood. I flipped it open again, and that's when I saw it. An envelope, taped down. Old floral tape, browned at the edges. I peeled it back slowly, feeling like I was opening something meant for me. And only me. I stood there for a while, holding the envelope in both hands. The glue had given out years ago, browned and brittle. The tape, a scrap of floral pattern like something pulled from an old church bulletin, peeled off without a fight. Inside was a note. Just one line, handwritten in Faye's familiar script. "Trust your gut. They're not done yet." No signature, no context. Just that. I sent another text to her, same as before. Still no answer. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed with the envelope in my lap, staring at the grain of the hardwood floor like it could spell something out. My mind replayed the missing photos, the ring on Thelda's hand, the hushed voices behind the door. Now this. People don't whisper when nothing's at stake. I stood up. Pacing helped. I opened my laptop, maybe to check the weather or read some article that would distract me. Instead, instinct took over. My hands opened an old email account I hadn't used in a while, one I'd shared with Thelda back when we co-managed some charity board. It signed me in automatically. There it was. Subject line, RK, containment options. I clicked, already knowing. Thelda had forwarded a thread to Jolyon. "She's been digging. We need to move fast." His reply hit like a slap I saw coming too late. "Let's discredit her. Medical records exist, right?" I stared at the screen. The cursor blinked like a heart monitor. I wasn't the problem. I was the plan. They weren't scared of what I knew. They were scared I might say it out loud. The dizziness came quick, hot neck, shallow breath, ears ringing. Not from fear, not this time. This was recognition. They weren't just erasing me. They were painting over me with a color of their choosing, making me unstable, fragile, easier to dismiss than to defeat. My mind snapped backward. 11 years old. Family dinner. Dad had just told some story about a business deal he'd closed, except he'd gotten the names wrong. I corrected him. Politely. Factually. Mom grabbed my wrist under the table, led me into the hallway, and said through clenched teeth, "Do you want people to think you're difficult? You're embarrassing us." Next day, I had to apologize to him for making him look bad. I tried to explain what really happened to my fifth-grade teacher later that week. She smiled like I was overreacting. I wasn't. You learn young in a family like mine. Silence is rewarded. Accuracy is punished. You're trained to mute yourself before you ever learn the sound of your own voice. I started packing, not angrily, not in a rush, just quiet. The zip of the suitcase echoed too sharp in the room. I paused, hand resting on the handle. Thought about calling Tiana. Maybe tell her I'd changed my mind. Maybe I'd imagined all of it. The ring, the soup, the emails. Maybe I wasn't meant to inherit anything. Maybe I'd made this hard on myself for no reason. Maybe being the difficult one is worse than being invisible. I opened the closet to hang up my jacket. Saw my suitcase, already moved, half unzipped. My folder, documents, notes, printed articles, shifted out of order. Fingerprints smudged across the zipper tab. They'd been in my things, without permission, without shame. The line in my mind drew straight. No forks, no guesswork. I grabbed my phone and typed fast. Don't back down. They're planning to declare me unstable. Sent it to Tiana. She replied in seconds. Then we fight smart. I photographed everything in the suitcase, every paper, every receipt, every item, sent backups to my encrypted drive, took the originals and slid them into a messenger bag, hid the flash drive inside a book jacket. My laptop closed with a soft click. I sat still, then breathed deep. One time, long. No one silences me now. Just as I stood to lock the suitcase again, the phone buzzed once more. No name, just one message. Check under the sink in the East guest bathroom. F. I didn't hesitate. I walked toward the bathroom like a soldier going to reclaim the battlefield. I closed the door behind me, turned the lock, and dropped to my knees on the bathroom tile. East guest bath, just like the text said. The smell of lavender soap filled the small room, calm on the outside. Not in me. I opened the cabinet. It wasn't hidden deep, just pushed behind a basket of hand towels, like someone wanted it found, but not easily. A small tin box. Square, light. Inside, folded carefully, was a copy of a handwritten will. My grandfather's name at the top. His signature at the bottom. Dated 5 years ago. Legal, witnessed, notarized, and my name. I was listed as sole beneficiary. The house, the land, half the financial holdings, the rest split among the rest, meaning Darnell and Thelda. A sticky note clung to the side. He wanted this safe. I kept a copy before they changed it. F. I just sat there. Document in my lap. Hands sweating. Not from fear. From the sound of something clicking into place. They told me there was no will. That he'd died without one. That he left things messy, like old men often do. Thelda had said it with a shrug. Delroy backed her with a nod. Darnell didn't say a word. That silence now screamed louder than anything. I remembered asking for his journals, his letters. They said they were burned. Too personal, Thelda said. He wouldn't have wanted them floating around. Right, it wasn't about protecting him. It was about erasing me. The ring wasn't the only thing they stole. It was just the most visible. What they really took was this. The piece of paper that proved I was part of the plan, part of the bloodline that mattered. I wasn't an extra. I wasn't an afterthought. I was meant to inherit. Me, not them. I scanned the will with my phone, hands finally steady, uploaded the images to a private drive I shared only with Tiana. Then I typed, found the will, handwritten, signed, witnessed, sent it. Her reply was almost instant. Start recording everything. Don't leave the house until we decide. I made a list, wrote it out by hand in my notebook. What else is missing? Who else knows? What's their next move? No more guessing. No more hoping someone would do the right thing. I'd seen what family loyalty meant in this house. It meant staying quiet so no one else got uncomfortable. That wasn't going to be me anymore. I opened my tablet, logged into the legal folder Tiana and I had shared. Something was off. Activity logs, files accessed, opened, modified, not by me, IP address, Merritt Estate Wi-Fi, Jolien or Delroy. Or both? I scrolled faster. The lawsuit filing we'd started together, someone had tried to cancel it. Another attempt to forward it to a generic legal junk address, buried in noise. They weren't just planning to gaslight me, they were planning to gut my legal credibility. If I said anything publicly, they'd say I was unstable. If I filed, they'd say I forged documents. I sent another message. They're inside my files. It's war now. I stared into the mirror above the sink. Same place I'd wiped soup off my mouth the night before. Same reflection. Different woman. I said it under my breath. Strong women don't ask for space. They take it. Granddad's words. Buried like everything else. But still alive in me. I folded the copy of the will, slipped it into a folder, and packed it in the second compartment of my bag. Then I checked my phone. Audio app still recording. 4 hours of ambient sound. Just in case, I opened the Messages app. Typed to Thelda. I'd like to talk with you and Dad tomorrow. About the will. Short, clean, no emotion. Just enough to let them know I wasn't bluffing. I zipped the bag shut and started walking toward the bed. As I reached for the envelope to tuck it away again. Footsteps. Outside the door. Slow. Deliberate. They stopped. Right before knocking. I didn't sleep, not really. Just laid still in the dark while my mind worked like a quiet machine, sorting through every word, every glance, every silence. That knock from the night before had vanished by morning, as if it had never happened. But I knew better. In this house, silence wasn't peace. It was the next move getting ready. I got dressed like I used to before court dates. Layered, neutral colors, no perfume. Practical. Intentional. I checked my folder again. Documents crisp and in order. Recordings backed up, phone charged, legal files sent to 3 places. The old me would have called this paranoid. The me standing here knew better. Downstairs, the house smelled like nutmeg and eggs. Thelda stood at the stove in an apron I hadn't seen since childhood, humming some old gospel tune like her soul was clean. "Morning, sweetie," she said, too light. "Hope you're hungry." I said nothing, but nodded. Darnell was already seated at the table, hair damp from a shower, scrolling his phone like none of this had ever touched him. I sat across from him, didn't speak, didn't blink. I reached for the sugar tin out of habit. And there it was, a folded piece of paper tucked behind the coffee filters. My heart paused. I unfolded it under the table. If they can't erase you, they'll try to shame you. Remember the ring, the soup, the silence? F. I folded it quickly, slipped it into my pocket. They'd done it to her. Tried to erase her, too. But she'd left footprints in places they'd forgotten to sweep. Thelda turned with a pot of something thick and steaming. "Soup," she said cheerfully. "Breakfast tradition, remember?" I remembered. Each bowl was set in front of us, but mine came first. Always did. I stared at it. Steam rising, a little richer than the last time. Heavier. I didn't move. Just watched. Everyone else lifted their spoons slowly, some stirring. Darnell kept talking, animated, reaching for toast with his left hand, gesturing with his right. His spoon sat untouched. And then, when no one was watching, when Mom bent to adjust the salt shaker, and Dad laughed at something dumb, I made the switch. My bowl for Darnell's. Fast. Precise. He didn't notice. No one did. I took a small sip from his original bowl, just enough to wet my lips. Then I folded my hands in my lap and watched. Darnell didn't hesitate long. Once Thelda gave her nod of approval, he dipped his spoon and started eating, bite after bite. My eyes stayed on him, even when I looked away. A few minutes passed. Thelda complimented his appetite. "You're the only one who still enjoys a good homemade dish." Dad laughed along, pouring more juice. I watched the sweat bead up near Darnell's temple. His blink slowed, his grip on the spoon less confident. He reached for water, missed the glass slightly, readjusted. He rubbed his stomach. The ticking of the wall clock became louder than any voice. I whispered, barely audible. "This isn't to hurt you. This is to see if they ever meant to hurt me." No one heard me. And that was the point. I stood and offered to help clear plates. Thelda didn't look up. "Just sit, honey. You've done enough." I walked out anyway. In the guest bathroom, I opened my phone, not to call for help, just to log the time. Sent Tiana a message. Soup switched. No reaction yet. This wasn't vengeance. It was control. Control they never thought I'd take. I stood by the mirror, same one from that first night. No soup on my lips this time. No confusion in my reflection. Just confirmation. Then I heard it. A crash. Porcelain shattering against tile, and Thelda screaming, "Darnell!" I walked back into the kitchen. Darnell was on the floor, one knee bent, the other flat out behind him. His hand gripped his stomach tight, like he was trying to hold something in. The soup bowl lay shattered by his side, thick liquid smeared across the tile like some kind of crime scene. Thelda dropped to her knees beside him, voice shrill and high-pitched, real panic now, not the staged kind. "Get water!" she yelled over her shoulder. "Ellison, get some damn water!" Dad moved like a man who didn't want to, slow, stiff. Nobody looked at me. That told me everything. I walked to my seat, took it gently, and picked up my spoon. Laid it across the rim of the bowl like I hadn't just become the villain in their narrative. I looked down, then up. Calm, quiet. They made me invisible. Now they couldn't unsee me. Thelda turned sharply. "What did you do?" Ellison followed with his hand on my wrist, not rough but firm like I was about to bolt. "Tell me this wasn't you, Raylene." I looked at both of them. "I didn't poison anyone. I just didn't eat what was meant for me." The room froze. Even Darnell stopped writhing for a moment. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and tapped the voice memo app. Hit play. The sound crackled for a second. Then Thelda's voice filled the room. "Tonight. It ends. She was never meant to come back." I watched her face as the words repeated in her own tone, her own cadence. Watched Ellison step back like he didn't know who she was anymore. Watched the guests in the adjacent room, neighbors, family friends, turn their heads just slightly. Not enough to interfere, just enough to acknowledge they heard. For one small breath, I thought it was over. But that house had one more trick left. Jolien came in through the patio door like he'd been waiting for his cue, flash drive in hand. "I think we need full context," he said. He plugged into the projector before anyone could stop him. And the screen lit up with a clip, my face, broken and puffy, a therapist's office, me crying. "Sometimes I imagine things that aren't there." Thelda gasped in that fake, breathless way she'd used when I scraped my knee as a kid. "She's been unstable for years," she whispered to the room. "You all know it." Jolien didn't look at me. He didn't have to. His job wasn't to debate. It was to doubt. I saw the guests again. They weren't leaning in anymore. They were leaning away. They didn't see a survivor. They saw a spectacle. I stood up. Quietly. "No." I opened my laptop, already synced to the room's projector, clicked open the email folder Tiana and I had built. Brought up the metadata file. A timeline popped up. Footage A, September 4th, 9:13 a.m. Footage B, August 12th, 3:47 p.m. 2 different sessions. Spliced, merged, context destroyed. I clicked again. Displayed IP logs, Jolien's credentials, his access points, the edits. Then I uploaded the will. My grandfather's handwriting scrolled slowly across the screen. My name, my inheritance, his signature, his wishes. Dead silence. Thelda didn't gasp this time. Her lip twitched, just barely. Ellison looked at the floor like he finally saw something down there worth examining. I turned toward them. "You wanted to erase me." I let the silence settle. "Instead, you exposed yourselves." I turned toward the room, voice steady. "You laughed when I was silenced. Now listen." No one moved. I didn't wait for permission. I called the sheriff. He was already on his way. Tiana made sure of that. On speaker, Faye's voice came through clear from my voicemail folder. I warned them. They didn't listen. I kept the will because they wanted it destroyed. I took my spoon and slid it across the table to Thelda. This was never about the soup. It was about who got served first. I pushed back from the table, stood up, adjusted my sleeve, walked toward the front door. And that's when I heard her say it, low, but just loud enough for me to catch. She just wants attention. I didn't turn around. I'd gotten exactly the attention they never wanted me to have. By the time the ambulance left, the town already knew. Small towns move like that, faster than facts, faster than common sense. No one got arrested, not yet anyway. But the looks were different. The whispers that used to follow me shifted direction. Now they followed Thelda, Jolyon, and the rest of them like shadows in the daylight. Jolyon resigned from 2 charity boards and the town's historical society within the week. Darnell was stable, but the bruises weren't physical. I didn't hear from him, not directly. The Merritt estate locked down like a crime scene without tape. My phone stayed quiet. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. Faye called. Said, "You finished what I couldn't start." I didn't answer her right away. I didn't know how. Because it didn't feel like finishing something. It felt like dragging a truth into the open and letting it sit where everyone had to walk around it. That was all I ever wanted. Justice is rarely loud. It just rearranges the furniture. I packed slowly. My hands moved without needing much from me. I zipped the side pouch of my bag and found it again, the linen handkerchief, folded neatly, still carrying that soft scent of cedar. I held it in my palm for a while, running my thumb across the stitching. For the quiet ones, the strong ones. Back then, it made me cry. Now, it made me stand taller. I placed it on the guest bed pillow like a final mark. A quiet flag on territory reclaimed. Then I walked out of that house without glancing back. Didn't need to. I already knew what was behind me. I moved into a small place outside of town. Apartment with creaky floors, dusty blinds, and no pretense. No expectations. Just space that belonged to me. Neighbors waved, asked how I was settling in, then let me be. The kind of small talk that doesn't pry. That's a kind of grace most people overlook. I signed up to volunteer at a women's center. Teaching journaling workshops, nothing fancy, just blank pages and permission to speak. One girl reminded me of myself at 20, polite to the point of invisibility, afraid of the sound her own thoughts made. She wrote poems that broke your heart if you read them slow. Healing doesn't come from revenge. It comes from telling the truth in a room that listens. A few weeks later, a letter showed up in my mailbox. The handwriting stopped me before I opened it. Thelda. I sat with it for an hour before reading it. It wasn't an apology. You always made things harder. I just wanted a quiet life. That line, like I was the storm, like they weren't the ones who set the match and poured the gasoline. I folded the letter in half, dropped it into the fireplace and didn't watch it burn. Then I wrote one of my own, didn't address it, didn't plan to send it, just wrote it for me. I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I don't need the weight anymore. One morning, I met Tiana at the park. We sat near the fountain while kids ran wild across the lawn. I watched one boy trip and fall, scrape his knee, then pop back up like pain had somewhere else to be. Tiana updated me on the estate. It'd be locked in probate for years. Doesn't matter, I told her. I have what counts. I opened a box Faye had mailed to me a few days earlier. Inside, the original ring, the one Thelda wore like it was hers, wrapped in velvet. No note. She didn't need to send one. I slipped it onto my finger, not for show, not for power, for memory. They thought silence was weakness, but it was just the beginning of my volume. I placed my hand over my chest, whispered, I wasn't erased. I was rewritten. By me.